Hello and welcome to Alasdair Aquatics. So, the topic of today's video is axolotls. Now, as I'm sure you guys are aware, if you watch my channel, you know I already have an axolotl and his name is Toothless. And here he is. He is a jet black melanoid axolotl and I've had him for I think over half a year now. And when I bought him, he was literally this big. And now he's a lot bigger. So what I'll do in the video today is go through the care guide for you sort of beginners out there. What are the sort of basics you need to keep in mind if you want to keep an axolotl or multiple axolotls at home. So just before we get into the video, I just wanted to explain the different types of axolotls you might have come across in pet shops and at friends' houses and things like that. So there are a few different varieties or morphs of axolotls. There is the common wild type, which is sort of grey with black spots. There is an albino, where the whole axolotl is white, and there's a few different ones such as copper. My axolotl Toothless is a melanoid axolotl, so he's completely jet black, and I really like that, hence the name Toothless. So there are a few more varieties of axolotls out there as well. I think there's even one that glows fluorescent green underneath I think a black light, which is quite interesting. But do some research into which axolotl sort of type or colour you'd enjoy the most yourself. So the axolotls don't breathe air. In fact, the frilly parts on their head, which you'll see throughout this video, are actually gills. Okay, so these guys are fully aquatic. Okay, they're not going to be coming to the surface for air or anything like that. There have been some very rare cases online where they have morphed into a sort of salamander, but if you're a newcomer to axolotls, I wouldn't worry about this. That's normally under situations of high stress, where they can go through that sort of metamorphosis, which I think is the right word. The first thing we're going to do is take into consideration the full-grown size of an axolotl. Now, the maximum size these guys can reach is about 1 foot in length, which is pretty big. This therefore means they also need a decent sized tank. Now, bear in mind they're not the most active animal, they're not the most active sort of tank inhabitant you're going to have. They are pretty chill, and that's part of the reason why I like them. So looking online, some people recommend a 10-gallon aquarium as a minimum for one, but most places recommend a 20-gallon. Okay, so something like this tank here is perfect for one adult, although admittedly if he does keep growing I might have to think about getting an even bigger tank in the future. So the main thing to bear in mind when choosing a tank for your axolotl is obviously you want around 20 gallons for one axolotl, and it's worth bearing in mind that you want to go for length rather than height. Okay, these guys are going to spend most of their time crawling around the floor. They're not going to be sort of free swimming very often. They do it occasionally, but most of the time they're going to be just chilling and walking about on the ground. As for equipment for your tank, you're going to want to get a pretty decent filter. Now, you're going to want to bear in mind that these guys aren't the strongest swimmers and they don't like high flow, but you also are going to want some pretty good filtration just because of the types of food you will be, of course, feeding your axolotl, which I'll get onto later in the video. On my tank, I am running an All Pond Solutions hang on the back filter that's been working really well. Of course, once your filter is all set up, you're going to want to make sure the aquarium is properly cycled. The way I like to describe axolotls to people are it's basically a fish with legs, okay? So they have gills and they're going to be wanting the same sort of water conditions that you would provide for a fish. This means they're not going to want any ammonia, nitrite or nitrate really in their water. A great way to get around the nitrate issue, other than doing water changes, is having a planted tank like I do. Now, as for tank decorations, These guys can be a bit dopey, which I think is part of the charm of them. You know, I love watching Toothless swim about, walk around. At times he can bump into things, so I wouldn't go adding too many spiky, sharp objects into the tank. And the other thing is they have really large mouths, and as you'll see during this video, when they eat their food, they sort of inhale everything around their food. So it's really important that when you're considering a substrate, to go with a fine sand, which if accidentally ingested can just pass through them no problem, or bare bottom, where you're not going to have any substrate at all. The reason this is if you had something like pea gravel or you know, any type of gravel, they could eat the gravel and it could get stuck inside them and cause an impaction. Another thing, you're not going to want a heater for these guys. Believe it or not, they're not tropical. You're going to want to keep the water nice and cool, so popping up on screen somewhere should be the ideal temperature range for the axolotls. Bear in mind that depending on where you live, if it gets too hot, you know, maybe these guys aren't the sort of pet choice for you. There are people I've seen on YouTube that use things like chillers and fans to keep their water cool. Here in the UK, it's only really a problem for probably 1 week out of the year where we have a bit of a heat wave, and the way I solved that was actually adding a little clip-on fan, and all that does is allows the water to evaporate a bit more, and it actually cools the water. Okay, it's just called evaporative cooling, just to make sure it doesn't get too hot for these guys, as that's really not what they're going to want. Another thing to consider when setting up an axolotl tank is lighting. Now, there's a lot of information online and a lot of different points of view. The sort of majority of people advise a tank with no lights at all, or a dimly lit tank. This is basically because the axolotl's eyes are sort of on the top of its head, and it can be stressed out. That's the theory. They can be stressed out by, you know, intense lighting. Now, I've actually found that my axolotl Toothless likes to spend most of his time just sat out in the bright light, you know, so he hasn't shown any signs of stress due to having his tank lit. Admittedly, I don't have this light on, you know, the full intensity. I keep it somewhat dimmed down, just enough light to keep the plants going. The main thing is I like to keep plants in almost all of my aquariums. This is because the plants pull nitrate from the water, and I believe they really do improve water quality. When keeping axolotls, it's advised that you only keep axolotls, okay? So if you try adding fish with these guys, any fish they can fit in their mouths, they're gonna eat. And also, because of their gills, they have these little frilly bits by their head. Some fish actually get confused and think it's something like bloodworm, and from what I've read online, can try and nibble at their gills, which is not what you want either. So I wouldn't advise adding these guys with fish, especially if you're just starting out. But I have seen people have great success with it in sort of much larger tanks on YouTube. So I guess that's something to decide for yourself and have a look at. And it's also sort of depending on the size of your tank. But if you're going for a setup like this, I probably would say just stick with the axolotl. They're pretty messy, and you know, a tank this size can just about deal with the bio load from one axolotl. So that's why I haven't added anything else in there. Now, the main food I feed my axolotl is this Amphibi Gold by Arcadia. I'll leave the name down in the description as well. What this is just a sinking pellet, and it's just a mixture of all sort of good things for your axolotl to eat, such as bloodworm, brine shrimp, daphnia, earthworm, and you know, other things in it as well. So it's quite good to feed them a pellet like that has a wide range of ingredients, rather than just bloodworm all the time, bloodworm, or you know, just earthworms all the time, earthworms. You know, a pellet like that actually can provide them a bit more variation in their diet. I do, however, sometimes also give him some bloodworm and earthworms as a treat. Okay guys, so what I'm going to do now is leave you with some hopefully interesting footage of Toothless swimming about his tank, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it. Like I said, I wouldn't call myself a complete expert on axolotls, but I have kept this guy for probably over half a year now, and I think he's relatively healthy and happy. But if you have any recommendations, be sure to leave them in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys think. Please give this a thumbs up if you enjoy it, and of course, please hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying my videos, okay guys? I've checked the statistics and it's less than 5% of you are subscribed, so I'm really trying to up that percentage. So again, if you like these videos, please hit that subscribe button. Okay, so it's bye from me, have a great one and enjoy some footage of Toothless.